Again, just to, are we limited to? Obviously, we're not limited to certain topics, but is there going to be like a general direction that you guys want to take these conversations? Like we were initially thinking of like things that relate to work stuff, but do you guys want to go into like personal topics too? You know,
Work?
like
It's pretty personal.
like I guess like not like personal things like like how are you and your wife doing, but personal like well, I guess when you go into if we go into like ways of thinking and that kind of stuff,
It has to be personal.
yeah, but
I believe that all these conversations, whether they have to do with work or not, like they have to be personal because it's our perspective.
so it's funny. So it's almost like we're taking this bigger picture. We're taking this big picture look at what we're talking about.
What makes you say big picture?
Big picture, like for example, if we talk about the way certain things happen in a particular situation in filmmaking, right, or in investing, or in building brands, we could figure out some of the things that are happening in that situation that will apply to other aspects of life, like for example, decision making, right, or whatever, morality, or different things, So like you can break it down and say, look, the reason why someone invests in this particular way is because they're thinking like this. Oh, and by the way, that reminds me of like in a regular non-work situation, that people think like that in this way too, and it's interesting because of this. You know what I mean? So it's like the same way of thinking applies to both work and to personal matters.
I mean, I definitely, I would think so. I mean, just because we make certain choices in our work life this way, like, I don't know that any one of us is able to separate that and be like, but that's not what I do in my personal. Like, at some point, I think the way that we think, right, it bleeds into everything that we do and how we do it. So I think, all these concepts and all these ideas, I think they kind of rule the way that we function in every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, so I think.
So I don't think you can separate and be like, no, this is only for like the way we think when it comes to work-related issues.
Yeah.
I think it's fits all across the board in how we decide to do things.
I agree. It's almost like saying, well, the reason why you operate like that in a work context is because that's the way you think overall, which will affect the way that you do things on a personal level.
Yeah. And if you understand that, if you understand like, why you make choices like this on a personal level, well, then that translates over into your work ethic and everything else, So I think to me, these conversations are about that, are about figuring out why we choose things the way that we choose things and why we like the things that we like. And by comparing to other people's, then you start to figure out where you fall or where you land in relation to someone else, because you can't do that unless you compare it to something else.
Otherwise, you're just comparing it to what you know, the way you see things, and you just kind of you're stuck in that little circle, I guess. Yeah. So I guess it's like it's talking about the why. That's a big aspect of it. So. And
I think it's important because I feel like that is one of the ways, one of the only real ways of knowing what the truth is about anything, so any subject.
Yeah.
Like, so when you think about like a thing, right? Like a subject that you're looking at, and if you're looking at it from this perspective, well, you can only know this side of that issue. But it's not until you talk to the guy that's on the other side over there, right? Then you can understand what's behind with the people that
Yeah.
are standing on that side are looking at.
Yeah.
And then, but that's not the complete picture. Now you got to understand what he's seen about that issue.
Yeah, it's funny because
And it's
we tend
different.
to. I remember talking to someone. There was a Bible on the table, right? And obviously, usually Bibles are like dark color on the covers, and they have white pages, right? For the most part. And so we were talking about that exact thing. Is like, if you look at it straight on, where all you see is the, maybe you see two lines where the covers would be, and you see the mass of the white pages, right? And people may conclude that whatever that is, right, is white. It's mostly white with a little bit of black on the edges, right? But they're looking at it straight on, so I mean, it looks like almost like a two-dimensional thing, right? It's a little black edges with a big white rectangle in the middle. And to them, they could be saying, well, that's the truth of the matter, because that's what I see. But then the guy on the side over here is saying,
It's all black.
all I see is this black rectangle. In fact, I don't see any white because it's from a different angle.
Is that camera position right? I feel like it's pointing at my crotch.
It is a little bit, but it's just that's the way. Yeah.
That's very
Okay, so
completely,
it's fine, right?
Yeah. It's
not,
just a super
okay.
wide. So like if we point it this way, we're looking at
Okay.
this.
Yeah.
ceiling.
I just noticed it right now. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, that's one way to make the conversation awkward.
Well, I mean, he's worried. You
Hey,
know.
it's concerned, you
We-
know.
I don't want my
focused on
crotch
it.
being like
The
if you
focus
go
of-
from his face to his face to my.
We have an hour footage worth of footage.
Yeah, it's like, hey, you know what? Moving on. How about that? So then, so going back to that, yeah, and that person could assure that that is the truth of the matter, because that's the
what he's
extent
able
of
to
what he's
see.
able to see,
Yeah.
right? So anyway, so yeah, anyways, you get the idea. They see it this way, and they'll say, well, it's pretty thick. It's like 3 inches thick,
Yeah.
or whatever. But the other person will see the spine, and they'll say, no, it's only 1 inch thick, because they're looking at it from the other angle. So you have people who are looking at the same thing, possibly from these different perspectives, and they could all say that their perspective is the right perspective because that's what they see. But what's failing to be done is that they're failing to look at all perspectives
Yeah.
and then make a judgment.
Yeah.
You
So
know,
so
of the
yeah,
thing.
you can never really get to the bottom of a thing by looking at it from one side only.
You know what's funny? Because when it comes to like problem solving, that's one of the things that it really helps for problem solving.
Yeah.
People, they throw around the buzz term like design thinking and that stuff, which is involves like divergent thinking, right? Looking at all the possible options, right? Before you rule them out, right? Like at least look at the viability of the different options, and then so you diverge and then you converge onto. But you converge when you start ruling them out. You know, ruling out what doesn't make sense or what may not work or it's not practical or feasible or whatever. I think that's very similar. It's very similar. It's like look at all the possible scenarios before jumping to a conclusion.
Right.
You know, in order to get the best solution that's possible. So
Yeah.
I think that's kind of
You know, when I started thinking about that recently, I was, I don't know if you guys heard about that whole, this magic trick that this guy made the Statue of Liberty disappear.
Mm.
You
I mean,
guys heard
I've heard
heard
about
about it.
something like that, but like maybe like a year ago. But I don't know if it was.
Oh, I think it happened like 10 years ago. I don't know. It happened a long
but
time
I
ago.
remember
Yeah.
hearing some mention of it.
Yeah. So I remember, I don't know, I saw a thing where they kind of explained, right? Like how
Yeah.
did that? Like, because it happened. It happened in national television and everyone was there. Like people were there present live and they're
Yeah.
like looking at this thing and he does this trick and it's like, it's gone.
Yeah.
Like, how did you do that, right?
Yeah.
So then there's a bunch of theories, right? And one of the theories, which I think is possible, was that basically he staged the whole area where he was going to present this thing, right?
Yeah.
So he had a whole audience and like all this lighting and all this stuff set up, right? And then he had a stage, and in the stage, like over there far into the distance, right,
Yeah.
on the other side of the island,
Yeah.
you could see the Statue of Liberty. It's like right in the center.
Yeah.
And so everyone was looking, everyone was sitting there, and they're like looking at this, and all the cameras and all the press and all of the people were there. And then he does whatever he does, you know, like his magician trick or whatever, his showmanship. And then, you know, he does the thing, or I guess they bring up like a curtain thing.
Uh-huh.
you
Just
know,
to block
which
the
is
view of
to,
the
to
people.
block the view, and then
the
like
spectators.
the whole
not,
thing.
not to cover the statue.
No, like I mean, they're in front.
Gigantic.
So they're like in, you know, they're far away from the
Yeah,
statue, obviously.
okay.
So they bring up this curtain where the stage is, where he's at, and he's there, and he does his thing, and like smoke comes out, and then like the thing falls, and the statue's not there, right? So like, what? So how did he do it? For a long time, people didn't know. And then they're like, oh, well, basically, no, people didn't realize that they were on a stage, and all they did was they rotated the stage.
Yeah, I think there's a similar thing that they do with like, I think like an elephant one. I think where they make like an elephant disappear.
Right.
Yeah, and so they realize or they realize after the fact
Of course.
that
But had you been a part of the exhibit, like you're there,
Yeah.
you're looking at the thing, and it's like, yeah, it's gone. Like,
yeah,
how
the
did you
attention
do
is
that?
so focused on one aspect. That's actually one of the ways that like pickpockets, they use the gaps in our attention, the way we focus, and they'll make you focus on one aspect in a way that you start paying attention to another, and that's where they work, right? You focus on this, and they work on the other side,
Right.
you know. So
Like, put your attention on this thing. Yeah.
yeah.
So I mean, you know, in that sense, you're like, there was no way for the people there to like really understand or know or have an answer for that thing. You know? But you know, anybody on the other side over there, they're like, wait, what are you talking about? It was there the whole time. Like, nothing happened to the
Yeah.
actual statue. But from one perspective, it's so easy to fool people into thinking a thing if you only have that perspective.
Yeah.
You only have that one way of looking at things.
Yeah, and that's super crucial, I think. And that's, I think, part of why we're even having these conversations is because
Yeah.
the fact of having only one perspective can mean, without going into, you know, whether it's good or bad, because everyone might interpret that differently, but it seems to, my personal opinion is it's more beneficial to have multiple perspectives. And beneficial, I mean, it's easier to converge on a solution when you're able to have multiple solutions. Because sometimes there's more than one solution for a problem.
Yeah.
You know? And when you have multiple solutions, then you have, or multiple perspectives to find multiple solutions, then you can choose the best one from those solutions. But when you only have one perspective, there can only be one solution or no solutions, and then,
Right.
you know, whatever you're looking to achieve.
I think
is
it's
harder.
definitely true that it's more it's beneficial to have the different perspectives, but you know, it's like in its time. So like, it's hard to say this like blanket statement like it's more beneficial for this thing to be the case. Not all the time.
Yeah.
I think there's times when it's like, no, let's narrow down the knowledge and the view and the perspective. Like, for example, for that magician, it was more beneficial for him to have, you know, an audience that can only see things from that perspective. Otherwise, he could not do this trick, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, when you say, yeah, it's better, or it's like, you know, good
Yeah.
versus bad.
Yeah, like I said,
It's like
dependent
based on the
objective.
situation,
It's
right? If
depending
you're
on
trying
the
to
objective.
solve things, well then.
And you know what's funny? I
yes.
think that ultimately gets down to the crux of the matter is that, like, that exact thing is like whether it's good or bad or whatever. It depends on the objective.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't even realize what their objective is, and so it becomes difficult to even find a perspective that
Right.
can give a solution because they don't even know what the problem is. They don't know what the objective is.
Right.
They don't know where they're trying to get to. Whether it's that applies to business, that applies
Of
to
course.
maybe investing, that applies to
Yeah.
I think
just
it
life
applies to
goals.
yeah, because I was gonna like take it to a broader level, like humanity too. Like sometimes we just lack perspective of other people's like cultures or whatever, and that's where, you know, hate and all this fighting and wars happen because we don't understand the other side. You
Yeah.
know? And I think that's especially like, you know, I've heard people say how like Americans just kind of focus on their own thing, like the American culture, and they really are completely ignorant about anything else going on, you know, in the world. And it kind of makes sense because, yeah, you know, like you talk to other people that come in, like, oh yeah, you know, they understand our culture, they understand their culture, they might even understand some other cultures. Yet we are just kind of like in our own little bubble, thinking that like we're the great. I mean, that's part of society, where it's come to. But yeah, I definitely see that. Like with Americans, they don't understand like beyond their little bubble here.
Yeah.
And I think if we do make that effort to understand their perspectives, understand why they see things the way they do, it can also bring us together, like in a broader sense, obviously.
Yeah, I think it has to do with what you just mentioned earlier, is understanding the why of because we're products of our environment, right? We're products of, like, for example, as someone who was basically raised here in the United States, I could say, well, I'm a product of my the education, right? So the education is westernized, so it's kind of like it's their fault. Okay, I mean that's one way of looking at it, right? But at the same time, it's like, well, I mean, I'm not a child. I'm an adult. I can make choices, right? And I could choose to be ignorant of other perspectives, or I can choose to not be ignorant of other perspectives, and I can choose to blame things on the system, right? And say, well, the education system blinded me to these facts. But then again, I think it's my own responsibility to ask why I allocated my entire trust to that education system. Why didn't I question the fact that, well, why do they use the westernized system of education that they're using, right? Is that best for me? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But at least ask the question and find out, not take it for face value.
I feel that, like, you can blame, everything around you for the reason that the things that are happening to you happen. And you can do that your whole life, and that's fine if that's the way you want to live your life. And I think a lot of people choose to do that, or not necessarily choose, but they think that that's the only way because that's what they've been taught, right, to do by the people before them, like their parents and then like generations.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's what some people are doing. And except that, like, then they feel that they're victims of every single thing that is happening to them.
Yeah, they're not taking responsibility,
right.
So they're
and
always
it's like,
victimized.
is that good or bad? Well, it is what it is. It's what's happening, and it's what a lot of people are doing. And it's like, at some point, I think some people, like, I feel like I've come to this realization that is like, oh wait, yeah, I could go and blame my parents and blame the religion and blame the school system and blame the government and blame all of the things that are currently causing the state of what things are, or what's happening to my life. But I can also be like, what can I do? Like, what are my options, my actual options, not what the news is feeding me that is like things completely outside of the scope of things that I can do,
Yeah.
And just be worried about those things. Like, no, there's things immediately that I can do in my life that affect, like every single choice that I make and where I position myself.
Yeah.
And if you start to focus on those things, well, then you start to realize that you actually have quite a bit of options. But people don't come to the realization unless they start to do the research.
But I mean, that's kind of part of human nature. We kind of like to, blame some other people instead of taking our, responsibility for our own actions. And I think that's just naturally what happens until you kind of like you say, you come to that realization, like, okay, maybe I can do something about it.
So when you say natural, like, human nature, what do you mean by human nature? Like,
I mean, like, psychologically, we're kind of wired to, like, find someone else to blame,
So where do you think that wiring came from? Because, like, is literally nature? Is that what animals are doing? Because that's nature, right? Like,
right.
At its core, like,
Yeah.
are the plants like blaming each other? Like they want to
No,
blame
I'm
their
talking
situation?
about like humans.
Maybe they are, but we can never tell that.
No, I'm talking about
It's possible,
like
yes.
humans. Like, I mean, I'm talking
Human
about
nature,
animals. I mean, we as people
Okay,
that
so
think
then maybe
have,
we influenced each other to think that way, and then we wired each other to do that.
right. I mean, it could be also like a social thing that like you're saying, it just evolves over time, and that's just what happens. Or I kind of remember hearing like it's like psychologically that's sort of how we're wired.
There's this thing in social psychology. It's called diffusion of responsibility, which is the more people who are around during a certain situation, the more responsibility will diffuse among them. So if the situation that happens, and one person's around, well then the responsibility is like 100% on the one person around, right? And if there's two people, well then the responsibility psychologically divides amongst both of them.
Right.
So they only see themselves 50-50 because there's only two people. And the more people there are, the more the responsibility diffuses itself.
Yeah.
You know?
And like thirds is kind of weird. I felt that here in this room.
Thirds is, yeah, so we're diffusing the responsibility to each other.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
there's a real famous
I blame
case.
Bryan.
There's a sad case and there's a famous case.
We both.
You guys have ever heard of the case of,
Right.
I think it's Kitty Genevieve, something like that. But it's a case of, it's a tragic case of a young lady who was physically assaulted. She was stabbed multiple times, and people were in their apartment buildings watching it happen, and no one did anything about it. And it went on for I think like 30 minutes or something. I mean, it was like she got stabbed and people were watching, and the assumption was, well, someone else will do something, right? I don't want to take responsibility for that. So I see other people are watching. Let them be responsible for it. I don't want to take, that burden or that responsibility for myself. So no one ended up. So the guy stabbing her saw that people were watching, so he left. He saw no one did anything. He came back and kept stabbing her until she died finally. And no one did anything. In fact, that was actually a big trigger for the study of finding out how
Right.
the human psychology affects these different circumstances, particularly when it comes to taking responsibility for things. So that's one thing that I think when it comes to understanding things, right? Like understanding why. I think people take that same approach. Is again, it's because of human nature, which you guys can say it's the way we influence each other by playing hot potato with the responsibility. Is I think that's one of the things that is affecting a lot of people, is that they put the responsibility of educating on educators. That's kind of been the role in society, is that those who teach are teachers. And if you're not in that role, well then it's not your job to teach. I think more and more as times have been more modernized, there's more of that division of labor. I mean, if we go back 100 years to, pre-industrial times, 150 years, I mean, parents were largely responsible for educating the children. But it seems like as we get more, as we're more modern, we're actually going backwards when it comes to the education, it seems, because that education is being divided into, well, it's your job to educate my children. And you probably heard of parents who blame teachers. You're not educating my child properly, and they get upset at the teachers. But it happens quite a bit. And when it comes to the responsibility, I think it's just the way that's a way that they're showing that they're not taking responsibility for that. They're diffusing it to someone else. That's your job. They don't want to be responsible for it, especially if it's if they're noticing a failure in that education. Who wants to take responsibility for a failure, right?
Well, I mean, I think we see that in society a lot. People we just don't like to take responsibility for things. Especially if they go the wrong. Well, if they go the wrong way, if they go the right way, then of course everyone
wants
oh,
credit.
yeah. But I mean, you can see that in politics. You can see that in business. You can see that among ourselves, just in social aspects. I mean, I see it all the time, and yeah, that was part of the study that I was trying to remember too. But I besides many other ones. But yeah, I mean, we don't like to take responsibility for our own actions. It's easier for us to just blame someone else or something else. The system, or that guy that I don't like, or you. In your case, it's true, but I mean, I do think that it is that is like the problem in many occasions.
Yeah, and I feel like you guys were saying earlier, it doesn't extend to just like not being able to find solutions for our work situations or whatever in business but it's obviously the same human is involved in both the work and the personal part of their life, you know? And so the same type of thinking will be used to evaluate both situations, you know? And so when it comes to trying to understand, you know, why things are the way they are, I find it useful at least to kind of see how a person, how they act, how they talk to people, and how they do certain things at work, because you can infer a lot of their personality. You can infer a lot about the way they think by the type of things that they do, in that sense. So I don't know what you guys think. We're ready to talk about the topic that we had on hand.
Oh.
I'm just kidding. No,
Oh, yeah,
that was a topic. No, actually, but that's a really good topic, because we're basically talking about like perspective. That's initially the topic, is like, how do you gain perspective? Is it good or bad to gain perspective? And like you mentioned earlier, is it good or bad? Well, who determines that? Well, I think it's determined by the objective.
Yeah.
Right? And I think people find it difficult to say, is it good or bad, because they don't know the objective. So how can you determine if something's good for the objective if you don't know the objective? Right? You have to know the objective in order to determine if this path that's being traveled is going to get you to that point, you know? And when it comes to business, it's easier to quantify, right? The objective is whatever if it's a for-profit business, the objective is to make profit, right? Sell a product or a service. If it's a non-profit organization or some kind of social cause, the objective is to get support for their cause, bring in donations, things like that. Be able to provide the services and the things that they want to provide to the people who need them. But when it comes to so it's easier basically to say what's right and what's wrong when you know the objectives for those type of things in business. It's easier to quantify. But in personal matters, right? Like, what is a person doing that's right or wrong in their personal life? That's where it becomes less clear, because we would have to be making an assumption that we know what their objective is in order to say, hey, you're going down the wrong path. You know, well, how can we say they're going down the wrong path if we don't know where they're even trying to get to? You know what I mean? So I think it becomes something that having perspective can open the doors to both solutions to get to the path and get to the place they're trying to get to, or it could inform a person even to know that there are paths to get to a place that they may not have even known was possible. You know what I mean? So it might even inform them that there is an objective to get to. You know what I mean?
Maybe.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks guys for coming. No, we're not.
Huh?
We're not ending there. Well, what do you think? What do you think? I mean, that was kind of a mouthful, and it may have been completely incoherent, but you know, let's make some sense out of it.
Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of things that we could talk about within that, within all of that. It's just, I don't know what do you guys want to focus on, I guess.
Well, I don't know. I mean, pick something. Is there a part that you want clarification on? There's a part that you say, oh, I don't agree with that. I think I see it more this way, or hey, I do agree with that for this reason, or, you know, you're completely crazy. None of that made any sense. You know,
No,
go get a haircut.
it makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. I think, like, we could talk about teaching, if that's a thing that you guys want to talk about, because that was the thing that you were talking about, and it's like, I have, I don't know, I feel like I've come to this realization, or I've come to this way of thinking more recently, where I feel that like the whole like education system, and not just the education system, but also like this whole like focus on improvement and like gurus that teach you how to improve on whatever.
Yeah,
it's
lately
like,
there's been a big
I feel like it's
boost
become
in that kind of thing.
so I feel like there's a thing that's going on that we don't. I feel like most people don't seem to be aware of, and it's like it's almost like, you know, it's this platform for people to like hook you in and try and make you feel like you need them, right?
Yeah, and feel is the key word.
And in order for them to basically, you know, it's almost like
Exploit.
they insert themselves as the middleman in order to attain the thing that you're after, and it's like you need them
Mm-hmm.
in order to attain it. And I feel like, yeah, the whole education system seems to be built that way, and it's almost like this hierarchy to like train you into the type of people that the society is trying to generate. Which,
Yeah.
if you get back to like root or like basics, it's like, well, society really just needs supporters of society.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, yeah, and that's when if you go back in history, and you look at how societies are built, right, even empires. Yeah, the people that it has, the people that it invites, the people that it trains, right, the people that it indoctrinates, are the people that it needs to sustain itself.
Yep.
You know, and I think a lot of people may find it uncomfortable or unpalatable to talk about the reality that sometimes that is not the best thing for people, for humanity, right? Is that sometimes they're being indoctrinated in a way that is actually hurtful and damages the environment, and you know, it hurts people and exploits them. But it's uncomfortable because they may be supporters of that system, right? And but the reality is that, like you said, that empire, that type of society, needs a certain type of person that it designs in order to keep the society going.
Right.
You know?
And it's like, I mean, we are all supporters of society, because if you're not, then
Well, yeah.
where do you live?
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
You have to go live in a mountain somewhere. And even that, a guy tried that and they didn't allow him to do that, you know? And so it's kind of like we've created this society where there is that is not an option. Like you kind of have to live inside of society, or
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
you've got no
or
other option.
Or start building a spaceship and
Yeah.
you know, which is actually being done right now, right? But
Right.
just not by one guy, it's by a bunch of guys, and you know, they call it like NASA and stuff. So and now they're like going to Mars and stuff.
But even that, it's like within the system, you know, within
Yeah.
within the society, you know.
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, because
it's a
once
part
we
of
get
it
to
all.
Mars, it's gonna be the same thing. Just it's on a different planet now. This it's gonna continue society.
Yeah,
the-
but
the
I
way
mean,
that it's
how
now.
are you going to intermingle with the little green men over there? Have you thought about that?
Yeah, I haven't.
See, there you go. You got to look at all perspectives. Anyways,
right.
but so
thought about
continuing
that.
with like you thought about. I think about that. Thinking about that now.
I think we're already interacting with them, but you know, that's just that's a different. We'll get into that later.
So going back to like education, right, and the way that basically other people influence themselves. So when we talk about society, I mean, we're using these terms kind of loosely, right? And like we always say, you know, buyer beware, right? Do your own research on this, you know. Do your due diligence. But when it comes to society, I mean, we're referring to, you know, a mass group of people, right? And specifically, like a society could even be referred to as a group of people who are trying to accomplish a certain objective, right? Like it could be a country. That could be a society.
Yeah.
Some people use that term to describe the culture of one country, right? Like the United States could be considered a society. Some people, that's how they use that word. And they're just using it loosely because they're not looking at the dictionary before.
Well,
they're
I
using
mean,
that
like
word.
anything we say here, it's kind of meant loosely unless we specify otherwise.
Yeah, yeah. So that's what I mean is when we're talking about society, are we talking about like the United States? Because you could say the society, and you could be referring to that, or we can be referring to society as mankind. And
That's a good question. I think for the most part, it's the like construct of like humans influencing each other in any capacity, like whether it's a group of people that live here and they're all influencing each, that's a society, right? And in
Even
this,
if it's not officially like some kind of society. That's what you're saying.
I mean, I don't know what makes it official.
Well, yeah, that's the thing.
Is there an official
So this could
society?
be a society. If we,
Of course.
If we were to, so that's
Absolutely.
what I'm just making sure we got the definition straight, that we know we're
Yeah,
talking about something. Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, I unless you're looking for like a centralized place that will officially like I don't think that's necessary, right? In order
Yeah.
for us to have a conversation about. So I think that I think when I refer to society as a whole, like it's going to be the fact that we, like humans, a group of humans, influence each other into thinking the things that we think.
Mm-hmm.
It's like all the things that I know are based on what someone else has thought about already, you know? Because that's the only way that I can have thoughts, you know? And it's like, because I was born in my family, and my family taught me all the things that I know. And then right as soon as I left them, I learned it from all the outside. And I mean, it's all been influenced. It's all like a remake. It's all it's all a
It's all a remix, huh?
it's all a remix. I
So
mean,
that's
like it really is. Like, I mean, it's just
What do you like?
it's just in my own, it's unique to me in whatever spin I take it, because I took all these influence, and
Yeah.
I also like this one other thing that the people that thought about this before me didn't like, and that's the only
Okay, cool.
thing that makes it original, but it's still only a remake.
Okay, so going, you just opened up that little can of worms. So then, when it comes to original thought and creativity, do you think that there is such a thing? Because I've heard, before you answer it, I've heard one or two people, some are like social media influencers and things, who have said that there is no original thoughts. Everything's kind of already been done, and everything is a remix. Which, I mean, there is a lot of merit to that. But in a more strict sense, do you think there are still original ideas that come out, like literally something that no one has ever thought of before?
Okay, so that's
And,
really
and no one. I mean, I'm using that loosely.
that's
obviously.
really easy. Look, first of all, I believe that everything is a paradox. Like every single thing that is true
Yeah.
has an opposite side that is also true.
Uh-huh.
And over here is that thing is false, but on this side that thing is true and this is false.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say that, like, yeah, every single thought that I have is original because I am having it, and no one else with all of the same influences that I have had
Yeah.
has had this thing. Like
Yeah.
no one has experienced my life the way that I am.
Yeah.
So like every single thought that I have is original. Is it a remake of a bunch of other people that have it? Absolutely. It's a remake. So like it's also true that, so depending on what is your objective?
So it's not.
What do you want to talk about? Do you
Yeah.
want to do you want to prove that there is absolutely no one original thought? Then we can prove that. If you want to prove that every single thought is right, we can also prove that.
Yeah,
because
I think it's more
true.
of the.
Yeah, that's
sense
what I was
of,
gonna
like,
say,
Are we
too.
talking absolutes or not absolutes? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because what we were saying, like, yeah, our thoughts are just a mesh of all these different things that we've experienced throughout our lives. And, okay, now I'm thinking it now, but again, like going back to, okay, well, everything's kind of been done. It's just like a little, addition, maybe more to what it was before.
I don't think so. Yes, you're right. Like everything has been done up until now, but the
Right.
thing that you're currently doing is
Right.
brand new right now.
Yeah, exactly. So but that's what I'm
This
saying. So like
brand
everything's
new-
been done. Whatever I'm
Absolutely.
saying, it's not any original idea, but we kind of continue to build on all of this. That original, or at the end, it does kind of create, in a sense, something new.
Oh, absolutely.
So that I mean,
Now branching off in this completely different, there's a real nice counter to that, saying that no, that's
There
not
always
true.
is.
This has always been it's to say, well, this is all cyclical. We already went through all this again. The universe already finishes expansion and collapsed upon itself, and then re-expanded again, and
Right.
we're just reliving this. But we're not assuming that, right?
Oh, of course we are.
Okay, no, because if that's the case, then the answer is no. There is no original thought. It's already happened before.
Except that every single thing that is currently look, the amount of possibilities in the universe, right, is infinity. So like every single thing that you go on to do from here on is brand new. So like that, you can consider that to be original because you are the one doing it,
Uh-huh.
and only you have that perspective. No one else does. So absolutely, like that is original for you, and for like from here on, like the things that we continue to do from here on, and like the possibilities are infinity.
Uh-huh.
So like of course, there's new things to do. You know, just because someone else did them doesn't mean that when I do them, they're not original. For
Yeah,
me, you know?
it's not the exact same thing.
So I mean, that's what I mean. We can go in circles about
Okay,
this.
no.
But,
But
there's a
I
point.
like that. So now this is one question I do want to ask: is how do we make that practical?
Mm-hmm.
Now it's kind of turning it from like theoretical, which is like interesting. You keep going, but how do we get something practical out of that? Like, okay, the fact that we are having original ideas. I mean, original ideas that we're remixing them in our own way, and they're original. So then, who cares? Like, what's the big thing about that? Like, is there any benefit to that? Or is it just like?
I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think it's a big deal, but it's the most important thing in my life.
Okay, explain that. I'm gonna read these while you're explaining. I'm gonna read these text messages. I'm just kidding. That's a way of trying to disregard what you just said. I'm gonna put it on silent, actually. Okay, go ahead. You just subscribe. Okay.
I was looking at her.
Okay, I just got the message. So, anyways,
Yeah.
so continue, please.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Like as a collective, you know, to our society, I think maybe that's irrelevant. But like for my experience that I'm having, it's pretty amazing that it's like, oh yeah, all these things that I get to experience, they're brand new to me, and because I'm experiencing them, they're special to me.
Yeah.
But like, when it comes to like as a collective, like, who cares?
So does
Because-
that help you to kind of appreciate
Absolutely.
every moment a little bit better? Because
Of
you know,
course.
there's people who suffer from depression, and people who are just negative, and people who don't see any purpose or hope or whatever. But that's a whole other kind of issue. But so do you think being able to say, seeing things as, you know, having original ideas, having these original experiences, makes you feel like more appreciative of the fact that you're here experiencing this? Like it makes
Absolutely.
you happy.
Yeah. So that to me would be a practical
Yeah, I think that's extreme because
takeaway from
yeah,
this.
when you think about it, I mean, that's there's very few people I would say that would deep down say that they're not looking to be happy. You know, I mean, there's some people who probably
I
do
think
say, yeah, that
there's a lot of
they
people.
absolutely do not want to be happy.
No, I
And-
think there's a
but-
lot of people that are not seeking that specific thing. That doesn't mean that they don't want to be happy. That means that they're not seeking.
Yeah. Well,
what,
I mean,
what a lot of people would consider to be happy. Like there's a lot of people. There's a whole religion based on just neutrality, right?
yeah.
So then, you know, they're not seeking to go too high on their emotional spectrum
So when-
because that means that you also don't fall very low in your suffering. So then they're like, no.
So
just
they're
want
seeking
to
their own
be neutral.
interpretation of what that happiness means.
What's that?
They're seeking their own interpretation of what that
Yeah.
means. So, yeah, I would agree that there's
Wow.
there's lots of noise in the background.
It's like knocking down some trees or
Yeah.
the
something
building. I don't know.
like that. Let's hope not. But yeah, so I think that's a real practical. I think that's very practical and applicable to all kinds of things.
Oh, absolutely.
Is being
Yeah.
able to say, look, it's a good thing. It's and I'm going to venture out to say this, but it's better than not to understand that, you know, having this originality, because that's where originally like creativity, right? It comes from the root word to create. Like there's these new creations happening,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's experiences or ideas or whatever. So when I think of creativity, that's what I think about. So I would venture out to say it's better than not to try to be as creative as we can, because I think there's a real practical application, which I think in your particular case, you said, "Look, it makes me happy," you know? And I think a lot of people can find more happiness by being more creative. What do you think?
Sure.
All right.
I mean, it comes down to, like, you know, we were talking earlier about realization too, because if you don't realize it and you just kind of feel like, you know, you're just meant to, you know, continue with whatever routine you have and you don't really think beyond that, then, you know, they're just going to continue doing that. But if you realize that, like, there's a point that you do realize that you know, you were in that you know, routine, and then you're like, oh, what the hell am I doing? and then you come to that realization, then yeah, then that's when it shifts. But before that, I don't think a lot of us have, or sometimes we just don't have that realization early enough to, you know, see it that way. So
Mhm.
it comes down to perspective too.
So would you recommend people getting out of that routine, getting out of their little rut every once in a while?
No, it's up to them, dude. They
So-
whatever they want to do.
I mean, I wouldn't. I wouldn't, you know,
Okay.
because it's like people will do it. People will do it in their time when it's time for them to do that.
Mhm.
And it's
Right.
like you can't, some people might not be ready for that. And it might be overwhelming to push anyone into a thing that they're just not ready to do. You know?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, people are gonna do whatever they want to do anyway. They can
Absolutely.
they can completely agree with what you're saying and your logic behind whatever you're saying. Yet, even if it benefits them, like yeah, okay, yeah, you need to eat better, you know, healthier, you know, nutritious food. Yeah, they agree with it, but are they gonna do it? Probably not, unless they are willing to, like, again, realize that and like, okay, yeah, I do definitely need to change this in order to improve, you know, my well-being, or, you know, so yeah, it comes down to that person at that time where they're at in life, you know, that they're motivated to do it or they're not.
And that ties in a little bit to the whole teaching thing and the gurus, you know, where it's like, I mean, you can, like, people seek it out, and that's fine if they're looking for it, right?
Mhm.
But then they have to be aware that seeking it out makes you now vulnerable to, or susceptible to these, like, this trap from a guru that is going to, like, hook you in and
Yeah.
be like, no, you're not doing it right, and
Yeah.
like you need me in order to teach you how to do it right, and then like
Yeah.
that becomes this cycle. So when people are looking for the thing, they're susceptible to that.
Yeah,
And-
they make themselves open to the confirmation bias, basically. where
Exactly.
They say,
Right.
which that happens all the time, right?
So that's a little bit what I have a problem with, this whole, like, you know, trying to teach someone or trying to suggest someone to, where it's like, you don't, unless you live with someone and you can, I mean, unless you're in their skin, you don't really understand what somebody else needs
Yeah.
and how to help them, you know, because we're
In an
struggling to
absolute- in
figure
an-
out
in an
what we
absolute
need.
sense.
Right.
In an absolute sense, I think there's a relative because we all go through relative experiences that are similar. You know, like we all have to eat, right? And even though we all eat differently, the basic process is generally the same, right? Is ingestion, you know?
Yeah, but look,
and
I have
excretion.
I have a wife that has a certain condition that, like, yeah, she needs to eat just like everyone else, but very limited diet because of a medical condition that,
Mhm.
like, you can't eat the same. So, like, someone, I could be trying to help and be like, look, eat this thing. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, that's harming her, you know? And it's
Right.
like,
Yeah, yeah. And I
so
guess,
even in that sense, you're like, oh, that's, I mean, absolute, or like, it's all relative.
yeah, well,
all of it is relative.
Well, what I'm trying to establish is that there is a point at which there is a common ground, because whether it's a limited
know.
diet or not.
I know that's what you're trying
Yeah,
to
yeah.
establish, but I'm trying to establish that
He doesn't, yeah.
No,
it's
yeah.
all relative.
Yeah.
Like, everything is relative to your circumstance, to your situation,
Yeah.
to your perspective.
Yeah, because I think it becomes difficult for anyone to teach anything if it's basically just, you know what, I can't teach you anything because, you know,
Yeah, but that's
it's
the thing.
relative that the teaching.
And that is exactly what my point is.
yeah, and the teaching will end there. So it's so are you?
I don't think that's where the teaching ends. I think that is where the teaching begins.
Yeah, so you're saying having
Understanding that is
having
where the teaching
a
begins.
teacher in the general sense that we think of one as maybe an authority figure may not be the best way to. In other words, having someone tell you what to do, and they're the teacher. That's what you're saying. It may not be all it's cracked up to be.
I think, I absolutely. I
Yeah.
think-
Okay. So see that I would totally agree with, is saying just because someone claims that they know more about a certain thing,
Mhm.
I think it's more of a control situation, right? Where
Well, it could be a
you're-
control, or it could also be arrogance that you think you know better than
Right.
the other person. You know,
Yeah.
It
'cause
doesn't have to be evil.
right, because
No, no, no,
I
yeah.
think I have come from that too. Like, you know, there's things that, okay, I read all this on whatever subject. Now I want to tell everyone else because I think I'm right now, that I have an insight that the other person didn't have.
Yeah.
But then, you know, there's a time that I came to realize that, like what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
Just because it helped me, that doesn't mean that the other person needs it
Yeah.
or cares for it. Or
So
is
in which
gonna,
context do you think that's because the reason why I say it is because when it comes to like my context, which is like branding and design, um, since it's not art, there is a right way and a wrong way to do commercial art, right?
Okay.
No,
I don't
yeah.
think so, but
no,
okay.
no, well, no, because a business hires a commercial artist.
See, there's arrogance we're time.
See, no, well, that's precisely why I'm addressing it, because there's a very specific situation where if a business hires a commercial artist to create some kind of visual communication for them, they're doing it because they're trying to reach a very specific goal,
Right.
right? So the business has an objective, which is to further their business,
Right.
right? So if the person who's providing the service, right, is providing something that will not help them achieve their objective.
Got it. But is there
Right.
only one way
No,
to further their business?
well, that's the thing, is they're choosing visual communication. So in the context of visual communication.
Yeah. In the context of visual, is there only
Yeah.
one visual communication
No,
way?
no, there's multiple. Like,
Okay.
for example, they could choose either film, they could choose some kind of print thing, they could choose some kind of a commercial, they can choose some kind of a music video. I mean, they could choose all kinds of things,
Right.
right? But when it comes to particularly what I do, which is like rebranding and the visuals in that sense, if someone is creating something in that context that will not help the business, right? Does that make it something that's good or bad for the business, right? In other words, if the objective of the business is to make profit, if that does not help the business make a profit and fulfill its objective, is that good or bad for the business?
I think there's things that benefit the business that aren't directly monetized or something that you can just quantify through money.
Yeah.
But in the end, it turns into profit for them in the long run. So
Yeah.
like, I think, yeah, there's things that can be done that don't directly see monetary.
Yeah, so they're bad for the business, right? So there are things that are bad for the business because it either furthers it from its objective or shuts it down so it will never reach its objective, right? And there's things that will further it.
Well, that's not what I was saying, but okay.
Yeah,
Well, then.
Absolutely not even
because you're
close.
talking about more like goodwill, right? Like you do something
Right,
that you're
right.
not necessarily profiting from it, but
Right.
it creates.
But I think, okay, now that you worded it that way, I get what you're saying. And you're saying if the objective here is to make money and like they hire someone and they're not doing the job of like helping this company make money, well, then that is that is wrong, like what they're doing.
Yeah,
I get it.
essentially, right? And so what
Okay.
I'm saying is, and the reason why that's even came up is because then you have someone like me, specifically, where I come in and say, okay, well, the reason why that visual communication is wrong is because of these reasons, right? These are the reasons why it's not connecting with the business. And this is how you can tell that it's not going to help you make your objective. So essentially it's teaching. That's the whole point, right? We're getting back to the whole teaching thing, right? So, and that's what I'm saying. Is that something that is beneficial, right? Well, see, I think in these types of cases, I think that it's very beneficial to have something that someone knows, to be able to tell someone who doesn't know something that is for their benefit. In this case, myself as an educator or teacher, teaching them this is what will make you profit and this won't, as opposed to them just doing it without that, right? So that's the difference that I'm trying to figure out. I think overall, I completely agree with what you're saying, is that having authority figures over someone, priming them, controlling them, feeding them ideas, robbing them of their own individual thought, and those type of things may not be the best way for people to learn, right? There's other ways of learning, but in certain circumstances, I think it's necessary to have certain people who can teach in the way that we normally consider teaching. Traditional.
Yeah, I mean,
That's what I'm trying to say is I think there may be some situations like that, you know, because I'm particularly in one of those situations.
oh, I mean, I get it. I get that. I don't think that because of the way the system works, our society, and the way that teaching has affected or brainwashed the generations of the masses. I don't think that means that we can't learn from others. Like, I don't think that that's what that means. And I think that, like, there's definitely people that are teaching that are, like, doing really good at teaching other people really positive things. I don't necessarily think that like the fact that I feel that teaching as a whole, means this thing.
Yeah, that's what
That
I
there
wanted to
isn't
clarify. Yeah.
that there isn't scenarios where,
Yeah.
like, I think it's absolutely true. Like, you learn, like, just like this, I think is true. Also, the opposite is true, and there's absolutely great ways of learning from
Yeah.
mentors and from, like, other people to
Yeah.
like, bounce back ideas with, and then start to, like, literally start to
Yeah.
figure out what you need. So yeah, I absolutely think that, yeah, there's a place for it. I just, and I think, yeah, saying that only one thing is true.
No, but it's incredibly ironic that I took that position because I'm normally in your position of saying, no, I can learn better on my own, because that's specifically my approach.
And
Is
I don't know, that's not for everyone either.
It's not for everyone, exactly.
Yeah.
And like that's what I was saying. There's certain contexts in which one is better than the other. And I think it behooves us to do our due diligence and to figure out which is which.
Yeah. So-
As opposed to just assuming that this is the best way because society or someone else told us that that's the way. Is that we
Exactly.
should take that responsibility to say that, to try to figure it out.
Like, understanding what our best learning environment is for
Yeah.
us personally, I think it's key to then go and figure out how you're going to learn the things. Because, if you just go to school and, you get put in a room with a bunch of people and, like, you're just expected to learn the same way that everyone else there learns,
Yeah.
and you're like, this isn't working for me. And
Yeah, it's like
now you feel like a failure because you're not learning, but it's like, no, that's just not that's not the learning technique that works for you.
Yeah, I mean, think about how
It's up to you to
public
figure out.
education works. It's like everyone who's 8 years old gets put in the same classroom. Like, all 8-year-olds think exactly the same and they learn exactly the same way. Of course not. It's quite ridiculous that that's the way. It's administratively simple for the school to batch kids in like that because they can put one teacher to teach one way.
Yeah.
And get that perspective across, right? Which is the perspective of the institution, right? So the perspective of the institution gets put across because there's one authority figure teaching one way, right? But obviously, if there's a 20 student classroom, there's 20 different perspectives, 20 different paths. Well, practically, from a practical standpoint, the school does not want to hire 20 teachers to tutor 20 students because financially, they'd rather invest in weapons and bombs and things. So I mean, it's they're more interested in investing in weaponry than in education. So that becomes an issue of priorities and things. But yeah, that's why education, I think, is one of the key things that, in particular, can help us to get to know who we are as individuals and inform us of our surroundings. But I think we have to ask why, ultimately. All right. I think that's any closing comments?
No, I agree.
No? All right. So
I
now
had
for
something before, but I kind of.
the next 40 minutes, we're going to talk about the blockchain. Now,
Wait, wasn't that the original topic?
isn't that what we've been talking about the whole time?
That was our topic last week.
know?
Leading up to it. Never
Well, you know
got
what?
to
One of
it.
these days, we're going to talk about that, I think. So
By then it's gonna, like,
how the
crash
blockchain is going to
and
revolutionize.
It's gonna move on by then. Like,
By the time we get around to it,
yeah, we're gonna be at some other different technology,
it's going to be some kind of Martian technology,
AI,
and the.
AI mixed with the blockchain together. It's gonna be the thing.
All right. Well, we'll talk about that in the next segment.
I think so.
Maybe.
Thanks, guys, for hopefully.
I mean, we'll try. We'll maybe, start with it.
We'll start with it, and then we'll see if we keep with it. Hey, that's been a norm so far, so that's good. All right. Thanks, guys.